So, how can child abuse affect a person later in life? It can affect people, depends on what the abuse is, whether it be emotional or physical or neglect, and depending on how long and how severe the abuse is, it can affect anything from developmental changes to where the person can't actually have a normal life. So they build up walls around themselves emotionally to protect themselves so no one ever gets close to them. And this can be, can affect not just their interpersonal relationships, but it can affect working relationships if they're ever on a job. They can be someone who, someone can't get to know. That, of course, can affect, if we're talking about how can it affect you later in life, you get into a work environment and now, none of your coworkers, none of your bosses ever feel like they know you, feel that they can, connect with you. That can affect whether or not you can prosper in your job and whether or not you're going to feel like you are being acknowledged and rewarded for your efforts. In which case, without getting therapy, without having some kind of work on that and acknowledging that, that can be an issue.
It affects the way they socialize with people, it affects their emotional well-being, it can affect them physically, make them sick, cause bodily harm, it affects their morals and their values, and it obviously can affect their intellectual development too if they're not coming to school and they're missing out on things because they are distracted or out of school. It affects every aspect of that child's life, and then that's who they're developing into being. So. You discipline a child when you're teaching them, and when you're doing it from a loving point, and you're trying to make them the best person that they can be, and you're helping them become a productive adult, and you're doing it because you care about them. Abusing them is usually based on anger. It doesn't have any purpose to it or any meaningful value behind it. It's parents who are either sick or sick in the head, or they're just overly stressed out and incapable of managing parenting.
Discipline is guidance to try to help imbue a natural moral code, an internal moral compass, if you will. Abuse is essentially where you just want compliance to the point where that compliance becomes itself an unhealthy expression of the person that is actually doing the abuse. But there's a difference between obedience and between actually doing something because it's right? If you have that kid who only obeys because if they don't, they're going to be hurt in some way, shape, or form, either verbally, violently, or physically violent. So I would say that's the deep kind of connection between discipline and abuse. My grandfather was a very, very violent person when he was younger, and he used to beat his children. When my own son was born, my grandfather held him in his arms, and he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, "Never ever beat your kids."
Thought processes versus what adults can do, especially sexual abuse. So children don't understand
unfortunately also something called false memory syndrome, where people can actually repress memories for long periods of time for any number of different reasons. But one of the things that we see is that when a child experiences something that they can't understand, they either interpret it through a lens that makes sense to them as a child, whatever age they are developmentally, or their subconscious essentially just completely tacks it away. And at a later date, what tends to happen is, they experience some kind of trauma, and to make this kind of analogy, that the unconscious wall that those memories have been kind of placed behind breaks, and now they have to deal with all this stuff. For whatever reason that happens, we don't know, but we know that it absolutely does happen, because there are a number of documented cases of it happening. My own mother, as a kind of an example of this, she was molested when she was 4, and she didn't really deal with this until she was much older, in her 40s actually. She went to her grandmother, her mother, my grandmother, and asked her about it, and my grandmother said, "Well, I thought you had forgotten about that." And my mother saying, "Well, why didn't you report it?" "Well, what would the neighbors have thought?"